Tolu, President Biden just spoke from the Oval Office earlier this evening. He is walking this really fine line here of being a unifier in chief, I suppose, but also someone who's battling a tough re-election against Donald Trump. What more do you know about how he and the White House are responding to what happened last night?
It's a very delicate balance that President Biden and his aides have to strike. He is the president. He's the commander in chief. He's the person who leads this government and has to lead Americans in times of trial. But he's also a candidate who's running for re-election, trying to get another 4 years against the person who was targeted in this assassination attempt. And so it is very difficult. They are trying to figure out how to strike the right balance. We are reporting in the Washington Post that there was an all-hands staff meeting at the Biden campaign today where the campaign chair essentially told the staff that there's no rule book for this kind of situation, that everyone has to just figure out things as they go, play things by ear, be flexible, and help one another. And President Biden made a similar remark during his speech in the Oval Office, calling for all Americans to stick together even in these hard times.
Brian, for the most part, I mean, both Donald Trump and Joe Biden have pointed out the need for national unity. But how does that happen? I mean, how does that even begin?
Unity can mean very different things to different politicians. When I hear Donald Trump talk about unity, what I think he's saying is reject politics. You don't have to worry about politics anymore if I'm back in office. We will all just get along again. That is, of course, highly unlikely because that's the promise that Biden made nearly 4 years ago. And of course, that did not come to pass. But rather than fantasize about unity, we should talk about a desire for nonviolence, for civil conversation instead of civil unrest. And that is where the vast majority of Americans agree. The average American is not, battling thy neighbor, right? We're not at each other's throats. We are not actually in a state of civil war. We are far from it. Most Americans have a lot more in common than they realize. It's just that our political debate is so polarized, so aggrieved, and sometimes, it ends up in this very dark place. What we're ultimately talking about is probably an individual, a perpetrator, who was mentally ill. So there will be debates about that, debates about guns. And honestly, if we get back to those debates, I feel like we'll be in a better place in this country because we will be back to those political policy arguments rather than conversations about whether America itself is being tugged and pulled apart.
And perhaps back to facts, frankly,
Yes,
we don't
yes.
know. We don't know what happened. We don't know his motivation. And maybe
Right.
this is a moment for patience, right? Rather than speculation.
Yes.
Maybe just have to wait to find out. Tolu, the Biden campaign, I was noticing they sort of paused digital and commercial ads. Interesting. Apart from that, how does this play out? Because how do you campaign in this climate if you're Biden? Going hard at pointing out what Biden calls, the dangers of Trump might itself be dangerous now.
Yeah, and you've already seen some of Biden's political opponents call out some of the president's past rhetoric, where he said earlier in the week that it's time to put a bullseye on Trump. And he talked about how Trump is a threat to democracy and a threat to the nation. And so Biden himself said that he wants to tone down the rhetoric. He does want there to be clear and straightforward debates in this country between two types of political ideologies. But he said those debates should be civil. They should not be violent. And both sides should condemn any form of violence in terms of how we solve the problems that this country has. And so I do expect as Biden goes back to the campaign trail, as his campaign restarts its ads and remembers that we are in the middle of a pitched political battle, that they will try to draw that contrast while also emphasizing things that have been part of Biden's political story and political ideology for a long time, which is nonviolence, compassion for those who are hurting, and the idea of being an elder statesman at a time of division. And so those are the things that Biden is going to be focusing on, and he's going to be trying to lean in on that message while maybe pulling some of his punches against Trump, not making the argument so stark against his political opponent, but talking about what he believes in, including nonviolence, democracy, and keeping Americans together as opposed to pulling them apart.
Brian, we have a whole bunch of reporters at the RNC, and one of them was telling us about how there's a big mural there of Donald Trump saying, "They're not coming for me, they're coming for you. I'm just standing in the way." Now that was there before this happened, but that imagery takes on a different feeling on this day. How do you think what happened will factor into the events? I don't mean to sound crass about it, but there's no doubt this is going to come up.
Yes, and in fact, Trump has already said tonight in an interview with the Washington Examiner that he's totally rewritten his speech that he's set to deliver on Thursday night. We'll see how true that actually is. It's very hard to trust Trump at his word, but he is saying he's going to deliver a different message as a result of this assassination attempt. His campaign has been predicated on retribution, on vengeance, and now he has a very real, very bloody story to tell because of this attack. I think we should recognize, though, this attack could very well have happened to Biden or to another politician. It was last year that Nancy Pelosi's husband was attacked in his own home. This is something that is disgustingly both sides in America. And so it's not possible to handcuff one side or another when it comes to political rhetoric. We need to create an environment and have a space where there can be heated debate, but a complete rejection of violence. And honestly, in the last 24 hours, we've heard all the right things from most of the right politicians. There have been some fringe actors making ridiculous, irresponsible comments, but that's mostly the social media freak show. I am heartened by the fact that most political actors on the right and left have said responsible things in the immediate aftermath of this attack.
Gentlemen, I have so much more to ask you, but we have to call it here. But I know we'll be talking in the days and weeks to come. Brian Stelter, Toluse Olorunnipa, thank you.
Thanks.